Hey everyone, it's Drew. I hope you're doing well. So last week, of course, we did the digital projection assignment, the front, back, left, right, top and bottom views. This week, foundationally, it's going to be pretty similar as far as line work and rendering are concerned, but we're actually going to be focusing more on these 3D views or the isometric views. So I've been talking with a lot of you via email lately, and I realized that I made two mistakes during the tutorials from last week. The first of which is kind of the interface of Rhino itself. I didn't really go through how to set up the same workspace that I have, so apologies for that. And the other thing is rendering qualities. I have a desktop, so I'm able to do a lot more computing power than a lot of your laptops. Not to brag, it's just the facts, folks. So sorry for those of you whose graphics cards I absolutely just destroyed. That was not my intent. It was kind of an oversight on my part. So apologies for that too. So to get the isometric views and some of the similar things that I have, we're going to type in toolbar and hit enter. And what that's going to do is basically bring up a list of all of the things that I have basically going on inside of my screen. So we want to make sure that properties is over here or checked. We want to make sure that layers is over here or checked, and materials are over here and checked. The big thing that we went through last week that I wasn't able to accommodate was kind of getting these isometric views in the displays that I've been getting. So in this list, I'd like everyone to make sure that display is checked. And I'd also like everyone to make sure that set view is checked. And when I hit OK, what that's going to do is bring up these two floating tabs that I'm just going to click on and drag up to the top. So if at any point, I'm going to try to type out a lot of the tool names from here on out just for simplicity's sake. But if there's anything that I click, like let's say I click this, but you don't have it, take note that this is in the standard tab. And then again, we can just type in toolbar. And if it's not checked, we can check it. Standard. It's right here. And we just need to make sure that's checked and hit OK. So that should alleviate a lot of the problems now that you guys know where to find those things. So let's get into the actual tutorial. If you'll notice, this is in perspective view right now. So as I zoom in, this stuff zooms in more than the stuff in the back. But for an isometric drawing, of course, we want it to be measurable and constant. So what we're going to do is go to our set view tab that we just created. And the isometric views are a part of this dropdown. So there's like this compass looking thing. Basically, this is the northwest view, northeast, southwest, and southeast. I'm just going to click on one of them. I'm just going to do the far left one for simplicity's sake. And what that's going to do, of course, is get rid of that perspectival view, and everything is actually measurable. So the first thing that I want to do in this tutorial, although it's not new information, I want to kind of cover the intersect to sets command. So what I'm going to do is right click over in my layers tab, hit new layer, and we'll just do intersections and hit enter. Of course, to change the color of the tab, we can just single click on the color, and let's change it to a nice bright green. And then I also want to click just to the left of the light bulb to activate the layer. Alternatively, you can right click the layer and hit set current. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually type in copy, hit enter, and it asks us for a point to copy from. So I'm just going to pick this corner over here, and I'm going to type in, let's say, 10 feet and hit enter. And what that's going to do is basically move it in a 10-foot radius around that point. So I'm just going to move it off to the side and then right click to exit out of that command. Next thing I'm going to do is click on this surface and explode it. And basically what that's going to do is allow us to just select everything underneath the main surface and leave that as an isolated thing. So we also need to copy over this grid. And the way I'm going to do that is by right-clicking my grid layer, select objects, and do the same process. So I'm going to do copy, click on a corner, type in 10 feet, hit enter, and left click, then right click. So as I mentioned in the first tutorial, we're actually going to want to get rid of these surrounding lines just because they add to the confusion, so that we're just left with kind of this checkerboard without boundaries, right? I'm going to click or left click and drag right to select all of those objects and type extrude curve and hit enter. And what that's going to do is basically bring all of those curves up as if they were walls. So I'm going to click basically somewhere above the surface like this. And hopefully this is a clearer visual of what's happening in the intersect two sets command. So I'm going to type in intersect two sets, hit enter, and it's asking for the first set of objects that's going to intersect the other. So we know that all these green things, we want to see where these touch the plane itself. So we're going to highlight all of the green, right click, and then click on the blue surface. Make sure that you're not clicking anything but that surface. And then when you right click again, it's going to give you the points at which they intersect. So I'm going to type in group and hit enter just so that we don't have to individually click each one of those lines. And I'm going to move that back 10 feet by clicking this green arrow right here. If you don't have what's called the gumball command, it's right down here at the bottom of your screen, or it should be. So as you can see, that option disappears if I don't have it clicked, but when I do click it, it does. So if I click on this green arrow, that allows me to type in -10 feet, and that should bring us back to where it's supposed to be originally. And then I can just delete all of this stuff by hitting the delete key on my keyboard. So now what we're going to do is click on this, the group that we just created, and also the poly surface for the couch itself. And I'm going to move that over 10 feet yet again. So that's going to leave all of this stuff over here. We know that it's the grid and the lines and projections. The reason that I moved it over to a new space is because if we, hid these and then we hid something on this and we wanted to show it later, it would bring up everything and it would just complicate the model. So I actually like to just kind of bring it over to its own little space. It actually might be a better idea to copy it over to a new space. So I'm going to hit copy, hit enter, and let's move it over 10 or 20 feet or whatever. So now what we can do is hide all of the extra layers that we don't need, which are going to be those. And we're also going to go ahead and hide these. So that should leave us with just a really basic set of poly surfaces and lines up here. In order to do what we're going to do for today's tutorial, I would like everyone to select all of this stuff and type in copy and hit enter yet again. We're going to click on this corner and type in, let's say, 7.5 feet. And now we're going to have two copies of the couch. So we're going to select all of that again, and then right click to reinstate the copy command. So alternatively, you can just hit copy again. But if I type in a command and I just right click, it'll automatically bring it up again. I'm going to click on this bottom right corner, move it 7.5 feet again. And if you hold down shift, it'll lock it into a right angle. I probably should have mentioned that a little bit early. But if we go ahead and left click, it should have 4 copies of the surface and the lines for us to play with. So what we're going to do at this point is rotate each one. So in the previous tutorial, we looked at just one model and then setting up all the views. So we would have to toggle through the northwest view, we'd have to toggle through the northeast view, so on and so forth. We're not going to do that for this tutorial. We're just going to render all 4 of them at the same time, and we'll see what happens. And I promise that we're going to really just dumb down the render settings because it's not necessary to get super into it. So when I ensure that I'm in this set view tab and I click the compass and this far left one, the northwest, what I'm going to do is pretend that this is the main view that we're using, and then we're going to rotate this one 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees. So that way we're seeing every corner of this couch. So what I'm going to do is just select this. And then again, if this gumball tool is hit down here, we should be able to click this blue line. I don't know if you can see it. The surface is blue. I'm going to change the color of that real quick. Yeah, that'll work. I'm going to hit this blue line. And what I'm going to do is type in 90. And what that's going to do is rotate it 90 degrees. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. If I select all of this couch, hit the blue line, type in 180. You'll notice that this is the opposing view of this. And now finally I select this bottom one, type in 270, and that is the opposite of this. So as you'll see, we have the couch looking all four directions, and we're able to see pretty much everything that is going on. So what we're gonna do is go back to our set view tab in the compass and reorient it to the northwest view. And let's go ahead and run the make 2D command. So again, all these settings should be fine. I usually just have the scene silhouette and the group output checked. We also want to make sure that maintain source layers is checked. It's very important. I know that some of you were having issues with them kind of aggregating once we brought it into Illustrator. We want to make sure that the view aligns with what we have up here, which is parallel. So that's great. I usually leave this as make 2D and then hit OK. So by double clicking on this viewport, I can get back into the top view, and we're going to notice that some of the lines don't show up, and that's where the extend command came in the last tutorial. The reason that it's doing that is because if we look at this top surface, because like these green lines are intersecting with that top surface, it's trying to read and convey two things at the same time. So it's not the greatest way to do it, but I think probably the best way to do it for our purposes is to go into our parallel view and click all four of these sets of green lines. And then I'm just going to move them up like 0.1 inches. So if you click the blue line on the gumball, or the one that's pointing up, and I type in just 0.1 inches, it's going to move it up really slightly. But what that does for us is it's not intersecting with this actual surface anymore. So again, we're going to highlight those and go to our northwest view. And you'll notice that this line work is still here. I'm going to go ahead and delete it because we don't need that anymore. So I'm going to hit that once again. So now I'm going to try to run the make 2D command again. And what you'll notice is that all of those lines are there because it's not trying to read two things at the same time. And you can see that it's a little bit off, but once we get it into the scale that we're going to have for the Illustrator file, it's really not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. So another thing I want to do really quick is over in our make 2D layer, yours might not show up expanded when you initially do it, but if you hit this drop down arrow, you're going to see that we have scene silhouette and curves if you checked off the same boxes that I did in the make 2D command. So the scene silhouette is basically showing us that Bjarke-Ingels outline. So what I'm going to do is right click on surfaces, select those objects, and you can see that it's just calling out the outlines of all these. So I'm actually going to make a new layer by right clicking and hitting new layer and do outlines. And I'm going to make it red because it's my favorite color. And then what we can do is right click on the outlines layer that we just created, change object layer. Another thing you want to do is type in join and then hit enter. And what that's going to do is basically any of these lines that were disconnected are now going to be connected. So I think this is looking pretty good. Let's get into the renders. So of course, this is where a lot of you are probably getting nervous and your computers are nervously kind of pulling at their collars. But I promise that we're going to dumb it down a bit because there's no reason to be as excessive as I was last week. So I selected all of my couch surfaces here. I'm going to go back to our northwest view. We need to make sure that the view that we render things in is the same that we did the make 2D in. So we're going to go ahead and hit that northwest view and make sure that it's the same view. We don't want to right click and drag around it because obviously this render is no longer going to match up with the line work that we just created. So if I'm in my northwest view, I'm going to go back to my standard plane and then click on my zoom selected. That'll get you there. So if I right click, please right click, don't left click because we don't want to render quite yet. If we right click on the render, it's going to bring up our rendering preferences. So what we're going to do is Make sure that this is viewport. You can make kind of custom ratios, but we're just going to leave it as viewport for now. And then 72 DPI, that's plenty fine. The quality really depends on your computer. Low quality obviously isn't going to look as good. I think the draft quality is a pretty good middle ground as far as time and processing power is concerned. So I would start out with low quality. Let's just go ahead and start out with the low quality, and I can kind of show you later on in the tutorial why that is. We want to make sure that the backdrop is a solid color. That's fine. We want to make sure that there's a transparent background, as always. The ground plane, we do want a ground plane. We do want to use a custom environment. We also want to check the skylight option, but we don't want to check the sun option. So if we have the skylight option checked, I want everyone to put the intensity at 0.25. And what that's going to do is basically not super flood everything with light, but it'll give us just enough contrast that it looks really nice once we get it into a render or in Photoshop or Illustrator, whatever the case may be. The rest of it you could probably leave the same. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to exit out of this, and by clicking on the drop down, I'm going to go to the rendered view. Alternatively, we can go to the display tab that we opened at the beginning of the tutorial and hit rendered viewport. So we can see that it's kind of dark looking, and it might be because of the material that we have, it might not. We're going to go to sun and hit enter, actually. I want to see what this looks like with the sunlight on. So actually, to get the shadows, we probably do want to have the sun on. Sorry about that. I'm going to go ahead and click here so that it brings me to Omaha NB, even though that's not the proper state acronym. And we can see that we have some really nice long shadows showing up. Again, I'm going to play around with these settings until I just get something that looks pretty nice. Something that shows the darks and the lights of each surface so that we know that it's a curved thing. I think this looks pretty good, actually. So you can just kind of mess around with those settings. And again, that's going to show us that we have highs and lows for each of these. So I'm going to select all of these again, go back to our set view tab and set the northwest view, and then hit our frying pan. And we'll notice that it's going to be kind of sterile just because all of these materials are gray. So what I would like each of you to do on your own, just pick a couple of colors that you like. Basically, once you click on one of these objects, you can go over to the properties tab. Again, if you don't have the properties tab, you type in toolbars and just make sure that it's checked. And also make sure the material button is checked. So if we have this selected and we're in the materials tab, what we can do is hit this drop down and hit use a new material. And I like to use plastic. And I'm going to name this one, my favorite color is red, like I already mentioned. So I'm going to rename it red. And we're going to change the color to, you guessed it, red. So if we look at it in the rendered view, it's a little bit strong for my taste. So maybe I'm going to kind of tone it down, just kind of search for a color that looks really nice. I like that. So with these materials, you can start playing around with the reflectivity, so we can see that there's like some kind of sun shining off of it. If I turn this down, that's going to go away. I like having the reflectivity up, but it is going to cause your computer to render more. So you can kind of play around with these settings. So that one looks good. The next thing we're going to do is click another one. Again, go over to the Properties Material tab and hit Use a New Material, Plastic. And let's name this one blue. We'll do like a nice light blue. So we're going to go over to our color, and I'm just going to pick out a nice shade of blue on the color wheel. Get like close to a Carolina blue, maybe a little bit darker. Okay, I like that. And then we're going to hit OK. And I'm bumping up the clarity. Again, you don't have to do this. The lower it goes, the less reflectivity there's going to be. And I'm not entirely sure what the difference between reflectivity and clarity is, but they both seem to kind of do the same thing. So, next surface, let's go ahead and click it and make it, what do you think, folks? Let's go yellow since we already have the primary colors kind of going. Going to go to our color. Hit yellow. And again, you can pick any color that you would like for this. In fact, I don't want anyone to use the same colors that I'm using. Just kind of, this is an opportunity for you to play around with the material settings and really the colors of what everything does. So if you want to not use plastic, you can also use a new material and import from material library. And that should automatically bring up this render content folder. This is the file path for it, except this is going to be whatever the name of your computer is. What that's going to do is let us look at, pattern. We can kind of import this. Actually, let's go to one with more stuff in it. Let's go to the wood folder. And you can see that there's a bunch of different types of wood that are in this project. So if I click on the top one and then shift click down to the bottom and hit open, it's going to take a second to process, so don't think that your computer has crashed. At least one file is of a type that cannot be loaded as content 0. That's fine, whatever. So now, as you'll notice, when I click this use layer material dropdown, it has all of those different types of wood inside of it, and you can see it pretty easily. So let's find one that looks nice real quick. I've actually been using this to kind of plan out my new apartment, a lot of the texture assigning and 3D modeling. Let's do a nice polished plywood. Okay, that looks like garbage. I scratched that. Let's do a nice Neove. Okay, that also looks like garbage. Just kind of play around with this until you find something that you like. And it might take me a second. Okay, that one's not too bad. Let's do maple dark. Okay, I like the look of this. So now what we're gonna do is we wanna make sure that there's no shadows being cut off by the side of the screen. So what I'm going to do is hold down Shift, right click, and just kind of drag to the right so that everything is still in the frame. If I don't hold down Shift, again, it's going to rotate around and misalign from the line work that we had going over here. So if I go to this, the Northwest view, Shift and drag, we look like we're in pretty good shape. So if I go back up to the standard tab, and right click on render settings. I just want to make sure that everything is good. Low quality, transparent background, sun's on, skylight's on, intensity is 0.25. That's important because if we change this to 1, like obviously it just gets kind of whitewashed. So I think the 0.25 creates a really nice contrast. And with that, we should be able to render it. So if you hit the render button and nothing happens for a while, that's perfectly normal. It basically just means that it's processing. There's a little icon down here that I missed, but it basically is going to say initializing render. So if that's pops up, that's a good thing. So what we're going to do is go to save image as, and what we're going to do is ensure that this is PNG. I cannot stress that enough. And we're going to do, let's just call it 2020 04 03 or whatever the date is, underlay 1. Then go ahead and save. All right, so now that that's all done saving, we can go ahead and exit out of this. And now we need to get the line work that goes on top of this. So we already made the line work earlier in the video. So if you go double click on this parallel tab, or alternatively go to viewport layout up here at the top. Again, you can type it in toolbars if it's not there, and go to this for viewports look. That's gonna give us this top view that we like. So if I expand the top view by double clicking on it, I can come down to this line work and select all of it. Okay, let's go to File, Export Selected, and then make sure that this drop-down says Illustrator, not Rhino 6, and we'll do 2020 04 03 line work 1. And then it's going to ask us what scale we want to export it at. If your model units are in inches, that's wonderful. That's what you need to do. Basically, just make sure that 12 inches in the Rhino model is equal to 1 inch in the Illustrator file. Make sure RGB is checked, and this should all be just fine. And hit OK. If your model is not in inches, you want to type in units, hit Enter, and basically just make sure that this model units is in inches. So now we're going to move over into Illustrator. I'm going to go ahead and hit File, Open. And I'm actually going to open the underlay, not the line work. We should go through the workspace for Illustrator real quick too, since we did it for Rhino. If we go to Window up here, Workspace, I use the Essentials workspace. And basically what that's gonna do for me is bring up the properties and the layers, and I think the Libraries tab. I've altered mine a little bit, but basically, in order to get, these are the three tabs that you need: properties, layers, and links. And if links isn't there, I don't think it's part of the essentials. You can go up to window and simply hit the links tab. And then it'll have a pop-up menu that you can just kind of drag to the side of the screen. So yours will probably look more like this with the libraries tab up here. I usually just close it out. I don't really use it too often, but as long as we have layers, properties, and links from the window tool, we are in good shape. So as I mentioned, I think last week, painters are going to use the program differently. So inherently, they're going to have a different set of tools, whereas we're architects, and I think the essentials works just fine. So the first thing I want to do is rename this layer render underlay. And when I click on it and I go to this properties tab, it also might show up here depending on how you have things set up. But basically the height doesn't matter too much. I just want the width to be 12 inches. And we want to make sure that this maintain width and height proportions is pressed because that way it's going to scale it properly. So this value should change from 11.3 whatever it was to 6.2056. So again, we still have the issue of kind of the bottom and top being awkwardly cut off. We can see the line right here. So what I want to do is edit the artboard, make sure nothing is selected, and hit edit artboards. And I want to make it the same height as the image is. And again, we get that from seeing the 6.21 right here. So now that the artboard is exactly the right size, we should be able to continue with the tutorials. So as far as the layers are concerned, we want to make sure that this render underlay is at the bottom, but we also need to get the line work into here. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and open up our Linework file. And I'm going to go ahead and do all the line work in this document first. So if I hit Control A, I can just drag this off to the side. My surfaces were white, so the line work obviously is not possible to read when it's over here. We want to make sure, please pay attention to this, that the outlines is at the top, these grids, like these intermediate ones, are at the bottom, and that these surfaces, kind of these medium line weights, are at the top. I'm going to go ahead and click this little dot to the right side of outlines, go to my properties tab, and we're going to have an option for the stroke down here. We're going to go ahead and change that to 1.75. And as you'll notice, that thickens up the outline around the entire thing. If we go back to our layers tab, we can click the surfaces. I want you to make those, or leave those as 1 rather. And then we're going to select the really small lines, go back to properties, and click 0.25 on this. So now we have like a nice difference in line weights. If we again hit Control A or simply click and drag to select everything, we can double click on this stroke button down here, or alternatively the one over here if it'll open. And we can go to the color mixer and basically hit this black icon, and that should make all of the line work black. Alternatively, you can go over here and you can get a little bit wider of a range of colors to go with. The RGB code for black is 000. So that looks pretty good. So I think we should be able to select everything and hit Control C or Edit Copy. We're going to simply copy that line work into our other file by hitting Control V or Edit Paste. And then we're going to go to the Layers tab right here. And this is important. If all of yours ends up being on the same layer, we want to make sure that we go into this triple line thing and do Paste Remembers Layers. So if I turn that off and repaste it, you're going to see that everything just pops up onto the same layer. So everything's on the red layer. Whereas if we do Paste Remembers Layers, it's going to maintain all of those layers that we had in the previous file. So what we're going to do is click and drag this so that this far right line is in line with the far right line of our render. And then we are going to click on this arrow, and we're actually going to, if we don't hold anything down, it's actually going to skew all the line work that we did. So we want to make sure that we're holding Shift. And what that's going to do is scale it proportionally and basically align it with the far left part of our line work. And then from there, we can basically just drag it up and make sure that everything is in the right spot. So you'll notice that the line work got a little bit different because we scaled it. So the stroke of the thing also scaled as well. So I'm going to go back into this, make our outlines 1.75. We're going to click our surfaces and we're going to make sure that they are 1. And then we are going to click our grid lines and make sure those are 0.25. And that gives us these really nice kind of representations of drawings. You can play around with the line weights if you'd like. You can also play around with the stroke color and kind of the render underlay. So for example, if I wanted these to be white, I could do that and they're a bit more subtle and we can just kind of focus on the exterior line work. Really, that's up to you guys. So again, this is just kind of a general tutorial. Make these whatever colors you want in Rhino and play around with the line weights and line work. And as you've noticed, it's a pretty similar process to what we did last week. The big difference is that we rendered everything at the same time as opposed to individually, and we played with some of the settings as far as renders. But we want you to play around with the materials, understand texturally what Rhino can do for you and color-wise what Rhino can do for you, and of course how that relates back to an Illustrator file. So the last thing that we want to do is go to File, Save As, and let's call this ARCH221 Doyle 2020-04. It'll be the 8th for the assignment, so 08, digital isometric. And then instead of saving it as an Illustrator file, I'm going to go ahead and save it as a PDF. Please do this because otherwise this background PNG isn't going to show up for us. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then a box is going to pop up. We want to make sure that preserve Illustrator editing capabilities is still checked. We're going to go ahead and save that PDF. And this is what you're going to upload to the box. Certainly, if you'd like to start working at the architect that you selected, so whether it's Zaha or Bjarke Ingels, you can start to do that. But this is just a really basic framework for getting this line work and render underlays in a three-dimensional way. So in the two-dimensional stuff like the plan view, of course, like we still had shadows, but these are a lot more pronounced because it's picking up the shape of the entire 3D object. And this is just a different way of rendering everything. So if you have any questions about this stuff, please reach out to me and we can talk about it. But otherwise, I think that pretty much covers everything for this tutorial. So email us throughout the week with questions. Don't wait until the last minute to do all of this stuff. And we will talk to you soon.